The translator bead in my ear had been running for 40 minutes, and for 39 of those minutes Commander Orethville had been almost pleasant. I was standing at the back of the grand chamber aboard the Quarum vessel, Ascendancy, third from the left in a row of 6 human security personnel, which made me furniture, expensive furniture, maybe furniture in a pressed uniform, with clean boots and a sidearm I had not been authorized to actually use inside the chamber, but furniture all the same. The chamber held 40 species and 312 delegates. I had counted them when we entered, because counting things is how I stay calm, the way some people breathe deep and some people close their eyes. I counted pens, boot eyelets, ceiling panels, delegates 312. Orethville stood at the central podium, 7 FT of Veth authority, in full ceremonial armor that looked had been grown rather than built. His translator spoke in real time, not the bead version we wore, but a chamber-wide broadcast that filled the room in 14 languages simultaneously. For 39 minutes he had discussed coalition standing, provisional membership protocols, interstellar trade agreements, the situation in the fractured territories. His voice was low and measured, almost warm. Then he got to humanity. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform contempt the way a human might, with a smirk or a pause for effect. He simply turned a page metaphorically and began a new section of his address. The same tone he used for trade agreements, the same measured cadence. He said that human biology presented certain structural limitations to coalition contribution. He listed them: short lifespan relative to the median coalition species, about 1/7 of Veth; longevity, neurological fragility under sustained high-stress conditions, pain response that compromised decision-making in combat scenarios. Grief, he noted, was particularly destabilizing. Humans experienced loss at a neurological depth that most coalition species had evolved past. He called it a legacy trait, a holdover. He called human soldiers optimized for loss, not as an insult, as a finding the way a doctor reads lab results. The chamber made a sound. My translator bead rendered it as laughter, though it flattened the texture of it. 40 species laughing in unison sounds less like mockery and more like weather. I stood very still. 6 FT to my left, Captain Owen Hart, my commanding officer, a man who had served 22 years, who had 2 commendations and a scar along his jaw from a breach operation that the briefing file still listed as classified, dropped his eyes to the floor. He did not object, he did not move. He looked at the floor and kept looking at it, and the chamber kept making its weather sound, and Orethville turned another page and moved on to the next agenda item. I looked at my left boot. The aglet on the lace was cracked, had been cracked for 3 months. I had been meaning to replace it since the supply run on Garrison Station, but there was always something else, and then another something else, and now I was standing in the grand chamber of the Ascendancy, listening to 312 delegates find humanity amusing, and my aglet was still cracked. I counted the eyelets on my left boot. 7 snorts. 7 eyelets, and the chamber laughed. And Captain Hart looked at the floor. And I stood there like the furniture I was, and did the only math that made sense. 7 eyelets, and nobody said a word. Orethville's address ended with a formal benediction that the translator rendered as something approximately like may your paths be productive. The chamber emptied in stages, species by species, with the careful choreography of a diplomatic event where every exit matters and nobody leaves in the wrong order. We left last, the human delegation, as we had arrived last. Hart walked beside me through the corridor back to our assigned docking bay. He did not speak for a long time. The corridor was wide enough for 4 people, lined with something that might have been stone and might have been compressed light. I had asked one of the Xenotech staff about it on the first day and received an answer I did not fully understand, so I had filed it under things that exist and moved on. Cole Hart said, "Sir, we are going to receive the formal coalition response brief in the morning. Full delegation meeting at 800. Yes, sir." Silence again. 3 corridors, 2 pressure doors that slide open at our approach and slide closed behind us. "It was a diplomatic address," he said. "Context matters." I thought about his eyes on the floor. "Yes, sir," I said. The docking bay was cold the way space-adjacent things are always cold. Not the sharp cold of winter back home in Gary, but the flat, depthless cold of a place that was never warm to begin with. I found my bunk in our assigned quarters, sat on the edge of it, and looked at my left boot for a long time. I thought about 6 names. I thought about a place called Kepler Station and a latrine, and 6 minutes of silence that I had never fully accounted for, not in any report, not in any way that made sense outside of my own chest. Dan Marsh, Lucy Price, Kevin Ford, Abe Turner, Rita Sloan, Sam Grant. I had been in the latrine when it happened. 6 minutes. I came back and the corridor was different, and they were not in it, and they were never in any corridor again. I thought about Hart's eyes going to the floor. I pulled out my maintenance kit. I did not have a replacement aglet. I put the kit away. I lay back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling and counted the panel seams, and I did not sleep for a long time, and when I finally did, I dreamed about nothing, which was the best I could usually manage. The coalition brief was delivered at 800 by a Veth attaché whose title, translated according to my bead as Coordinator of Transitional Affairs, he had the energy of someone delivering paperwork he found mildly distasteful. He stood at the front of the human delegation conference room aboard our dock ship, the Harlow, and he explained the Vel Crucible. I want to be clear about how he explained it, because the way he explained it mattered. He did not say this is your opportunity. He did not say this is a challenge we believe you can meet. He said in a voice my translator bead rendered with all the warmth of a maintenance manual that provisional species seeking full coalition standing were required to demonstrate combat viability through an established trial called the Vel Crucible. 1 representative, 1 attempt. The fracture maze on Velsara. Multi-environment combat labyrinth, 9 distinct chambers, each calibrated to test specific physiological capabilities. Veth warriors trained for the Crucible for months in advance. Trial had existed for 211 years. 2 previous provisional species had attempted it. He did not mention what had happened to those 2 species. There were 14 of us in the room. I sat in the 3rd row, which was technically the back row because the room was small, and the table only had 14 chairs. Hart sat at the front, to his left Colonel Dana Webb, who outranked everyone present and always looked like she was calculating something unpleasant. 2. Hart's right, Major Greg Nolan, who had 3 official complaints filed against him in the past year and who I therefore trusted about as far as I could diplomatically throw. The attaché finished speaking. Silence. I counted it 7 seconds. We would need to review the full parameters before committing to a representative, Colonel Webb said. Of course, the attaché said. His voice did not change. He had been expecting this. What is the recovery protocol for the representative following completion? Webb said. Standard coalition medical provision. And in the event of standard coalition medical provision, the attaché said again, in exactly the same tone. The room understood what that meant. The room went quiet again. I raised my hand. Not dramatically, not like a moment the way you raise your hand when someone asks who finished the last of the coffee, and you decide you might as well own it now rather than later. Hart looked at me. One look, the kind of look that a person who has known you for 4 years packs with about 11 different things simultaneously. This one had. I know why you are doing this, and I cannot tell you that you are wrong, and I hate that. I cannot tell you that. Specialist Cole, he said. Sir, you understand what is being described? Yes, sir. The crucible was designed for Veth physiology. Yes, sir. You are not Veth physiology. No, sir. Another pause. The attaché was watching this exchange with the expression of someone observing a process he had been trained not to interfere with. May I ask, the attaché said carefully, what this individual's designation is? Specialist Dre Cole, Security and Recon. The attaché looked at me. I looked back. His eyes were the gold-amber color of something expensive and held about as much readable expression as a coin. The coalition would wish to confirm. He said that humanity is certain in its selection. The way he said selection had a very specific quality. The quality of a person asking a question they already know the answer to, asking it for the formal record, rather than any actual inquiry. I said before Hart could respond, do the math. Hart closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Specialist Cole is confirmed as humanity's representative, he said. They gave me 5 days before departure. 5 days to review the full fracture maze. Parameters, receive the coalition standard briefing package on Velsura's environment, submit to a full medical assessment that I passed because the medical officer running it had the good sense not to ask me too many questions, and pack whatever I was bringing. I brought my standard kit, my maintenance tools, a change of clothes, and a photograph of 6 people that I kept folded in the inside pocket of my jacket. I had been carrying it for 2 years. The fold lines had gone soft. On the 3rd night, I sat on my bunk and read through the fracture maze. Parameters for the 4th time. 9 rooms. Room 1, pressure environment. Atmospheric density, approximately 3 times standard. Veth trained in this. Their respiratory systems were built for it. Room 2, fractured light spectrum. Designed to overwhelm visual processing. Veth saw in 8 spectra. I saw in 3. Room 3, thermal drop, extreme cold. Designed to test circulatory resilience. Veth had double-wall cardiovascular. Architecture, I had whatever I had, which had gotten me through a Gary, Indiana, winter with a broken furnace, and soup heated on a hot plate. Room 4, psychological endurance. Trial, the maze read your fear profile and broadcasted back at you, amplified. For Veth warriors, it simulated defeat. Loss of honor, the death of their command unit. For me, the briefing said, it would simulate whatever my fear profile indicated. I knew what my fear profile indicated. Rooms 5 through 8, physical. Endurance, reaction speed, tactical. Processing, environmental adaptation. Each one calibrated to something that Veth did better than me. Room 9, speed trial, head-to-head. Against an automated system. Pure. Reaction time. I sat with the parameters for a long time. Then I turned the page over and wrote on the back of it. Against each room I wrote what I had instead of what the room wanted. The list was not long, it was not impressive, it was the list of someone who was going anyway. On the last night before departure, Hart knocked on my door. He came in and stood against the wall. He did not sit, he looked around the small cabin, the packed kit bag, the briefing papers on the bunk, the photograph. I had not yet returned to my jacket pocket. He looked at the photograph for a moment. He did not say anything about it. The coalition has confirmed the observation protocol, he said. Orethville will be present in the monitoring station. I know. You do not have to do this. I picked up the photograph and folded it back along its soft lines, tucked it into my jacket pocket. Someone did, I said. He was quiet for a while. You turned down officer candidate. School twice, he said. Yes, sir. Any reason you are willing to share? I thought about it, then I said, they keep putting me in rooms I am not supposed to survive. I figure I should stay close to the rooms. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He left. I turned off the light and lay on the bunk in the dark and stared at where the ceiling was, even though I could not see it. I thought about the 9 rooms. I thought about the list on the back of the parameters sheet. I thought about what Hart's eyes had done on the floor of the grand chamber. I thought about 7 islets. I did not sleep. Valsora from the landing approach looked like a planet assembled by someone following instructions they did not fully trust. Flat in some places, jagged in others, with an atmosphere the pilot described as technically breathable but not enjoyable. She said it the way you describe a meal that will sustain you, but not in a way you will remember fondly. The fracture maze facility was built into a ridge that looked like the planet had cracked itself open and then changed its mind. From outside it looked like nothing, a door in stone, no signage, no ceremony. A different attaché, a Veth official, gray robes, who introduced himself by title rather than name, led me to the threshold and gave me the final formal briefing. 1 attempt, no external assistance, no communication with the human delegation. Once I entered, the maze would monitor my vital signs, not for my safety but for the official record. Orethville and the coalition observers were in the monitoring station 300 m away. In a separate facility, they would see everything. Do you have any questions? The gray-robed official asked. How long is the record? I said. Pardon? The record, fastest completion time. He looked at me for a moment. The Veth crucible has never been completed by a non-Veth candidate. I meant the Veth record. A pause, 4 hours, 17 minutes. I nodded. I stepped through the door. The first room hit like a wall. Not a physical wall, the air itself had been compressed into something that did not want to cooperate with lungs. My chest locked up, my vision narrowed. The pressure was absolute and immediate, and it pushed. I did not stop, I slowed. Slowing is not stopping. I have known this for a long time. I moved through room 1 at the kind of pace that probably looked from outside like walking through water. Every breath was a negotiation. My body said, this is not workable. I said, I am aware. We kept moving. Anyway, the door at the far end was a flat gray panel with a release mechanism at standard Veth height, which was above my comfortable reach. I pulled myself up, hit the release, the door opened. I stepped into room 2. Room 2 was light. Specifically fractured light, a spectrum bombardment designed to overwhelm Veth visual processing, to saturate the 8-band sight they had evolved and use it as a weapon against them. The room was full of it, colors that did not match any name I had for them. Frequencies that moved through the air like they had somewhere to be. I stood in it for a moment. I blinked. It was bright. I walked through it. I could see the door on the far side clearly because the 3 spectra my eyes processed did not include whatever the light was attacking, and so the light was attacking frequencies I did not have. I stepped into room 3, and room 3 tried to end me with cold. Not the cold of space, that was a different category of problem entirely. This was bone cold, the kind that gets into the marrow and reminds the marrow that it is not as permanent as it believes itself to be. -40 in seconds, my exhale fogged. Immediately, my fingers registered the drop and filed a formal complaint with my nervous system. I thought about my mother's apartment. The winter I was 16, the furnace had been out for 9 days. She had an old hot plate she kept on the counter, and we heated soup on it, whatever was in the can, and she called it camping, which is the kind of thing you say to a 16-year-old to make the problem seem like an adventure rather than a failure of the landlord to return calls. We slept with every blanket we owned. I wore my coat to bed twice. I walked through room 3. My fingers were not happy, I noted this, and moved on. The door at the end of room 3 opened into room 4, and room 4 was quiet. Not empty, not dark. Quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. The maze had read my fear profile. The briefing had told me what that meant. I knew what was coming. Knowing what is coming and being ready for it are 2 separate things that people sometimes confuse. The room gave me Kepler station. Not a hallucination, not quite, more like a pressure, a frequency of memory. The specific quality of air I associated with that corridor, the ambient sound, the vibration of the secondary generators. My brain supplied the rest, the way brains do when given enough of a prompt. Dan Marsh, Lucy Price, Kevin Ford, Abe Turner, Rita Sloan, Sam Grant. 6 names, 6 people I had known and worked with and eaten bad food alongside, and complained alongside, and been in the same unit with for 14 months. I was in the latrine when it happened. 6 minutes. I came back and the corridor was different, and they were not in it, and they were never in any corridor again. The room held all of that up for me like a mirror. I looked at it. I had been looking at it for 2 years. I knew every angle. I knew the shape of it. The way you know the shape of a stone. You have carried long enough. I walked forward. The room did not escalate. The room did not back down. I walked through it the way you walk through weather, not because it stops, but because standing still is not a plan. The door on the far side opened. Room 5 was an endurance run, a gauntlet of automated obstacles, calibrated to Veth reaction time, which was faster than mine. I took 2 impacts, one across my left shoulder. That spun me into the wall, one across my right hip that made my next 4 steps uneven. I recalibrated and kept moving. The door opened. Room 6 was a tactical maze, multiple paths with wrong routes that looped back. Veth navigated it through pattern recognition at speed. I sat at the first junction for 40 seconds and listened to the ventilation system in the walls. Air moved differently through the path that led forward. I followed the air. Room 7 was a sensory environment designed to cause disorientation. Lights, sounds, atmospheric pressure, fluctuations, all at frequencies built to disrupt Veth equilibrium. My equilibrium was apparently not calibrated the same way. The sounds were loud and the lights were irritating, and I moved through it like someone walking through a bad party. Room 8 was the one that got me. A physical course, walls, obstacles, elevation changes, timed sequences. The course demanded a level of output that my body had been declining towards since. Room 5. My left leg had developed a deep, insistent ache somewhere around the shin. That was not a good sign. I did not have time to assess it properly. I ran the course. The ache became a specific located pain. That told me something structural was not happy. I filed this information in the same place I filed most urgent physical information during operations, which was a shelf labeled "Deal with this later." And I kept moving. The final obstacle on Room 8's course was a vertical climb, 4M smooth, faced with Veth proportion handholds, spaced for a reach I did not have. I found edges they had not intended to be. Edges, joints in the surface material, places where the construction had left gaps smaller than a centimeter. I used them. I cleared the top. My left leg informed me of several things about its current condition. I thanked it for the update and stepped to the Room 9 door. Room 9 was where I was supposed to fail. A speed trial, an automated system Veth built, calibrated to match a Veth warrior's reaction time, head to head. The system would run. I would run first to the exit gate, cleared the maze. The system was faster than me. This was not a feeling, it was a fact. Veth reaction time averaged 40% faster than human baseline. I was not 40% faster than my own baseline. I stood at the starting position. System activated across from me. I looked at it. For 4 seconds I watched how it moved. Just that, 4 seconds. It was algorithmic. It ran the optimal route for a Veth body at Veth speed, calculated by a system that had been built 211 years ago by engineers who had never in 211 years needed to account for a runner who would arrive at Room 9 damaged, slower, and looking for a different door. The system had a pattern. Patterns have inefficiencies. The starting signal hit. The system launched. I did not race it. I cut across its path. At the second waypoint, where the optimal Veth route curved wide to account for a wall that I was small enough to move inside of. I took the inside line. It did not exist in the system's root calculation because a Veth body could not use it. I was not a Veth body. I hit the exit gate. The gate opened. I stepped through. The corridor beyond was empty and white, and the air tasted flat, and my left leg was communicating urgent information, and my shoulder had something to add, and the photograph in my jacket pocket pressed against my ribs, and I stood there in that flat white corridor and breathed. The completion time, I found out later, was 6 hours and 42 minutes. Not the record. Not close to the record. The only time that had ever mattered. My left leg was not great. My aglet was still cracked, same as when I went in. They brought me out through a side corridor into a secondary chamber, smaller and cleaner than the grand chamber aboard the Ascendancy, with seating arranged in curved tiers for the coalition observers, 27 species, 141 delegates. I counted them because I count things. I did not limp. Limping is information, and I was not ready to give it. The coalition representative, the same one from the original briefing, the one who had explained the crucible with the enthusiasm of a maintenance manual, stood near the entrance with a Veth medical officer who looked at my leg and then at me with an expression I interpreted as professional concern and personal bafflement. I let the medical officer run a brief assessment. Stress fracture left tibia. She said something in Veth that my translator Bede rendered as this is not standard. I took that as a compliment. Hart was in the observation gallery. I could see him from the floor. He was standing, not sitting, which was not standard protocol for the observation. Seating, he was also doing something with his jaw that he did when he was trying to keep his face appropriate to the situation. Major Nolan beside him looked like someone had told him the punchline to a joke he had not heard the setup for. I walked to the center of the chamber. Orethville was at the far end. I had seen him at a podium, in full ceremonial armor, elevated at a distance, measured in political symbolism. Now I saw him at ground level, and ground level was different. He was still 7 FT. He was still built for a gravity that made mine look like a suggestion. His armor had been exchanged for something less formal, but no less deliberate, the kind of clothing that communicated authority without announcing it. He was looking at me the way he had not looked at anything during the welcome address. He was not dismissive. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that I could not name what he was. My translator Bede processed language, not facial expressions, and Veth faces did not map to human emotional registers the way humans sometimes assumed. I stood in the center of the chamber and waited. The coalition representative moved to the podium. He began the formal proceedings, the certification of my completion, the review of the monitoring record, the confirmation of time and route and results. He spoke for approximately 6 minutes. I used those 6 minutes to put even weight on both feet and not let my left leg make me into something other than what I needed to be right now. The representative finished speaking. He said that humanity's representative had completed the Veth crucible. The chamber was quiet, not the weather sound of the grand chamber, not the sound of 40 species finding something amusing. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that Happens when something has shifted and the room is still measuring how far. Orethville stepped forward. He moved the way things move when they are comfortable with the space they take up. No performance, no announcement. He stopped at a distance that my translator bead flagged as deliberate proximity in Veth protocol. He looked at me for what might have been 5 seconds or 15. I held his gaze because looking away was also information I was not prepared to give. He said, "I have revised my inventory." My translator bead delivered it flat, the way machines deliver everything. But a xenolinguistics officer, I found out later from Carol Penn, who specialized in Veth formal register, told me that phrase carried weight that did not survive translation intact. It was not a casual revision. In Veth diplomatic culture, an inventory was a formal assessment, a documented position. Revising one publicly was an act with consequences that rippled through their diplomatic record. He was not apologizing, he was doing something that in his culture cost more than an apology ever could. I stood with that for a moment. Then I said, "Ain't exactly a compliment." Hart made a sound from the gallery. Nolan looked like he needed a moment to himself. Orethville held my gaze, his expression shifted. My bead did not have language for it. He said, "No, it is not," a pause that felt considered rather than hesitant. "It is a correction." The chamber absorbed this. I absorbed this. I looked at my hands, because they had started shaking now, that the adrenaline was stepping aside and letting reality move back in. The stress fracture in my tibia was filing its full report. My shoulder from room 5 was adding footnotes. My hands shook with the kind of fine, persistent tremor that comes not from fear but from a body that has been running on fumes for 6 hours deciding to file its paperwork all at once. I looked at the room around me. 141 delegates from 27 species. Several of them had been in the Grand Chamber 2 days ago. Several of them had made that weather sound. I thought about Owen Hart in the floor. I thought about 6 names in an inside pocket. I thought about 7 eyelids. I did not feel victorious. Victory was a clean, bright thing, and what I felt was not clean or bright. It was complicated, in the way real things are complicated, with edges, and it was going to take a while to look at directly. What I felt, standing there with shaking hands and a fractured leg, was something closer to I needed to sit down very soon, and I needed to do it somewhere private. The coalition representative moved to the next portion of the proceedings. Hart was making his way down from the gallery. The medical officer reappeared at my elbow with an expression that strongly suggested she would appreciate my cooperation in sitting down before my body made the decision without me. I sat, not gracefully. I sat the way a person sits when their body has been sending memos they have been ignoring for 6 hours. Hart reached me at the same time as the medical officer. He crouched to my eye level, which I noted because Hart was not a crouching person by nature. "Cole," he said. "Sir, you ran that with a fractured tibia. Stress fracture, different category." He looked at me. "Different category," he repeated with the tone of a man filing that under things he was going to think about later. "The leg held," I said. He looked at it. The medical officer was now doing things to it with instruments That communicated a low professional regard for my previous decision-making. You know, Hart said quietly, you could have told me. I thought about this when before or after the door. He did not answer. Orethville had not left the chamber. He was speaking with two senior coalition officials in the tier near the entrance. I watched him without making it obvious that I was watching. He had the quality of someone conducting multiple simultaneous conversations with the officials in front of him and with whatever internal process his public inventory revision had set in motion. He did not look in my direction again that day, but before I was discharged to the medical bay with a splint, 2 prescriptions, and a medical officer who gave me the kind of look that made clear she would be writing up this case study in detail. I was handed a formal coalition communication through the representative. It was brief. It acknowledged the completion. It confirmed the standing request would move to formal vote. It used the correct diplomatic language for all of it, the kind of language that sounds like nothing and means everything. At the bottom there was a single additional line from Orethville, rendered through formal translation. I've been studying the wrong data. That was all. Hart read it over my shoulder. He did not say anything. I folded the communication and put it in my jacket pocket next to the photograph. I sat in the medical bay on Velsura and let the medical officer do her work, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about what it meant for something as large and fixed as a formal inventory to be revised. I thought about the 6 names pressed against my ribs. I thought I did not do this for the inventory. I did not do this to revise what an alien commander thought about us. I did not do this to become someone's case study or coalition footnote or corrected data point. I did it because Hart's eyes went to the floor and nobody moved and I was still standing. That was the whole of it. 6 weeks later, humanity received full coalition standing in a ceremony aboard the Quorum vessel Ascendancy. I was there. I stood in the back row of the human delegation in a pressed uniform with clean boots because that is where I stood. The ceremony was significant and appropriate and carefully choreographed and lasted 3 hours, and for most of it, I thought about whether I had packed my maintenance kit or left it on the Harlow. I had not packed my maintenance kit. I noted this. There was nothing in the maintenance kit that I needed at the ceremony, but the act of leaving it was the kind of small administrative failure that occupied my mind with useful efficiency. The Quorum Council voted in sequence 27 member species, each cast by formal representative. Each vote was announced with its own specific ceremony. Hart sat at the front. Colonel Webb sat to his left with her calculating expression. Nolan, for once, was very quiet. The final vote came in. Vote confirmed. Humanity admitted to full standing in the interstellar coalition. There was a sound in the chamber, different from the weather sound. This sound had a quality the bead rendered with a word I had to look up afterwards, something that translated approximately as the closing of a necessary door. I was not sure if that was complimentary. I put it on the shelf with things to think about later. The shelf was getting crowded. Behind me, a hand touched my elbow. Briefly, I turned. Pete Larkin, a private who had been on the Harlow detail and who looked like a recruitment Poster and everything except his actual behavior was standing at approximate attention and holding a slightly crumpled posture. Specialist Cole, he said, he had been trying to catch my eye for most of the ceremony with the expression of someone working up to saying something and revising it the whole time. Larkin, I just wanted to stand straight, I said. Your posture is giving me a headache. He straightened immediately like he had been spring-loaded. I noted that nobody had followed an instruction of mine that fast in 3 years of service. I decided not to examine what that meant. I just wanted to say, he continued in the posture of a person trying to sustain a compliment while standing at perfect attention, that what you did was good ceremony. I said, pay attention to it. He paid attention to it. Hart found me in the corridor after. He had a way of locating me in rooms and corridors and debrief cues that I had never fully explained to myself. Not because it was strange, but because it was consistent, and consistent things were either habits or intentions, and I was not sure which this was and had not asked. How is the leg? He said. Fine. The medical officer on Velsura filed a report. I know. She described your decision to continue through rooms 5 through 9 with a stress fracture as operationally inadvisable. She is correct. We walked together through the corridor, past the polished stone or compressed light that I still had not properly understood and now suspected I never would. The corridor was empty at this end, which I appreciated. The ceremony had moved to a reception in the main chamber, the kind of event where everyone stands in a room with food they cannot always eat and says true things in ways that do not fully mean them. I was not in a hurry to get there. You turned down OCS twice, Hart said. You mentioned this before. Are you going to turn it down a third time? I thought about it. I thought about the maze not as a test, not as an achievement, as a problem. 9 rooms, each calibrated for a specific capability I did not have. I had moved through each one not by developing what the room demanded, but by finding the thing the room had not accounted for. Room 2's light had not accounted for limited spectrum sight. Room 3's cold had not accounted for a Gary Winter. Room 9's algorithm had not accounted for a runner who would look for the inside line. The whole maze had been built by something that had never imagined a runner who would look for a different door. Probably, I said. Hart nodded. He had known the answer before he asked. He asked anyway, which was the kind of thing he did, asked questions he knew the answers to, because the asking was the point, not the answer. We reached the entrance to the reception chamber. For what it is worth, he said, and then stopped. I waited. He said. I looked at the floor. I looked at him. He held my gaze. His jaw was doing its thing. His eyes were doing something I had less experience reading, something that was not quite shame and not quite apology, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. I know, I said. I should not have. No. I know that. I know you know that. He stood with it for a moment, then he nodded once, the kind of nod that files something without resolving it, and stepped into the reception. I stood in the corridor for a little longer. I went to the reception because not going would have required an explanation, and I had used up my explanations for the week. The room held the usual arrangement of coalition species doing the things coalition species did at formal receptions, maintaining safe distances in configurations their cultures, prescribed consuming or not consuming, the available food in ways that communicated hierarchy and familiarity, making the sounds of polite diplomatic exchange. I held a drink I was not going to consume and stood near the wall, which was my default position in most rooms. From that position I could see Oreth Val. He was not at the center of the reception, he was near the edge of it. Not at the wall, but not in the density of it either. He was speaking with two members of his delegation in a configuration that my limited cross-species social reading interpreted as obligation being discharged. He was here because he was required to be here, the same way I was. He looked in my direction at one point. Not a stare, not a moment, a snorts. Look the way you look at something you have been thinking about and are now cataloging differently. I looked back. Neither of us moved toward the other. Neither of us looked away first. It was not a competition, it was more like an acknowledgement, the kind that happens between two people who have been in each other's inventory and know it. He inclined his head, small, deliberate. I inclined mine. Then we both returned to our respective edges of the room, and the reception continued around us, and the coalition was whole, and humanity was in that equation. 3 weeks after the ceremony, I received a letter through the diplomatic communication channel from a xenolinguistics officer named Carol Penn, who had been assigned to the ascendancy detail and had apparently been waiting for the official period to close before she could send it. Her message opened with, "I have been meaning to tell you this since Valsora, but there are protocols." The letter explained in language that was simultaneously academic and clearly containing suppressed excitement that the expression on Oreth Val's face when I had exited the fracture maze, the one my bead could not translate, was a specific Veth affective state with a formal name. It translated approximately as the specific shame of having left a door unlocked that you told someone else was a wall. I read it twice. At the bottom of the letter, Carol Penn had added a footnote. She said that Oreth Val had, 2 weeks prior, formally requested access to the complete historical record of human military operations from the Coalition Archive, not as a threat assessment that had been confirmed through the formal request language. The request category was study. The Veth word used in the formal request translated as, "I have been reading the wrong books." I sat with that for a long time. My bunk was the same bunk it had always been. The cabin was the same cabin. The Harlow was docked at Coalition Station now, which was a different quality of stillness than deep space travel, less movement, more settling. The station sounds were different from ship sounds. I had been cataloging them. I took out the photograph. 6 people taken on Kepler Station in the mess at a table in the 3rd row. From the door, Dan Marsh had been making a face at something out of frame. Lucy Price had been mid-sentence. Kevin Ford was eating. Abe Turner and Rita Sloan were leaning into each other the way people lean when they have been in the same unit long enough to share the gravity of a space. Sam Grant was looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who knew the photo was being taken and had simply decided to be present in it. I had been in the latrine. 6 minutes and then a different corridor and the same photograph, and 2 years of carrying it in the inside pocket of a jacket against my ribs. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it back in my pocket and I got out my maintenance kit, which I had found in my secondary bag right where I had left it, and I looked through it until I found what I was looking for. A replacement aglet. I had bought it on Garrison Station 3 months ago, put it in the maintenance kit, forgotten about it. Remembered about it, forgotten again. Here it was. I changed the aglet on my left boot. It took about 4 minutes. The old one had been cracked down the center seam. Not enough to fail, not enough to cause a problem, just enough to be a thing that needed attending to for 3 months while other things kept needing attention first. The new one went on clean. I pressed it into place and ran my thumb along the length of it. My boot looked the same as it had before. I put the maintenance kit away. I sat on the bunk with my left boot on and thought about the aglet, which was a completely unremarkable thing to think about. That unremarkableness was itself something. 3 months of corridors and summits and fracture mazes and ceremonial chambers and diplomatic translations and 6 names and 7 islets, and the aglet had just been sitting in a maintenance kit waiting. Now it was changed. Nothing else was fixed. That was not the same as nothing changing. Kepler was still Kepler. The names were still names. Hart had still looked at the floor, and the floor had still been the floor, and neither of those things could be revised back into something they were not. Some things you do not get to correct. Some things you carry in an inside pocket until the fold lines go soft, and you do not put them down, and that is not weakness, and it is not damage. It is just the weight of the specific stone you were handed and decided to keep. But I was in the equation now. Not as a footnote, not as a provisional element pending review, as a documented fact, coalition certified present. Carol Penn's letter was on the bunk beside me. I picked it up and read the last line again. I have been reading the wrong books. I thought about what it meant to become someone's revised reading, to be the thing that caused a 211-year-old inventory to require a correction. I thought about Pete Larkin snapping to attention in half a second flat. I thought about Orthval at the edge of the reception inclining his head. I thought about the inside line in room 9 and the ventilation air in room 6 and the hot plate on my mother's counter and the flat bright light in room 2 that could not find the frequencies I did not have. I thought about all the rooms designed by something that had never imagined a runner who would look for a different door. And then I put the letter down and I lay back on the bunk and I looked at the ceiling, and I did not count the panel seams. For the first time in a long time, I did not count them. I just looked at them. Outside, the station settled into its particular nighttime rhythm, reduced ventilation cycles, lower ambient light. In the corridors, the distant mechanical patience of a very large structure doing what it was built to do. I thought about 6 names and 7 islets and a cracked aglet that was cracked no longer. I thought it was a hell of a thing, turning out to be someone's revised math. But I had been a hell of a thing before. I would do the math.